Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode. In this one, I'm going to teach you how to build a berm and then hopefully answer a bunch of your questions. Okay, let's kick things off. This trail I'm standing on right now parallels Sharknado, and it was inspiration for my build, honestly, because the dirt here is so inspiring and so dialed, and it's just full of so many epic, perfectly sculpted turns. And today I want to teach you how to build a great berm, everything you have to think about from drainage to the radius, and like how to make it last, all that sort of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a walkthrough of this trail right here. We're going to do a walkthrough of Sharknado. I'm going to show you a bunch of different examples, and then we're going to end the episode off with a brand new berm rebuild. I'm going to go to an old beat up corner and we're going to make it beautiful again. Okay, let's get up to Sharknado to start things off, and I'm going to show you some of the things I thought about when I created those corners. All right, we're at the top of Sharknado here. I got my phone out with me because I want to make sure I answer every single question that was sent to me last night on YouTube. Okay, so here's the top of the trail. As you can see, it's just like a little small kind of rock you pop up onto. You drop down and then it's quite flat behind me. And you can see the first berm is right here. And the purpose of building this corner was not only to line me up and aim me for the direction I wanted to go, but it was to help me generate speed because I'm starting off pretty much stopped. And one of the first questions I got here by Taco Truck was, what's the best way to build a berm to generate and carry speed on? Okay, let's take a look at how I built this to build and generate speed on. So it goes downhill, although it's a fairly flat section. So at the end of the corner, you can see how it starts to fade away here. It actually dips downhill. And to do that, I dug down in the ground off the very end of it, and I made sure it would dip down there. So even if you're in a pretty flat section, if you can dig into the ground, give it some downhill grade near the start and finish of the corner, that's really gonna make a huge difference. And you can see here, it's dug about 1 foot into the ground, so not as deep as some of my other corners. But if you look at like where the forest floor was originally sitting up here, I took the whole run-in, I dug the run-in down. All right, so I ended up digging this down, and then I like made the whole ground entirely lower, built it up, and I made it as steep as I could because once you pack a corner, it does flatten out a little bit. So always start to build it steeper than you initially think it should be. Which brings me to the next question by Ben Hansen, which is, how steep and high do you make berms? How do you pick the radius? How do you measure the radius? Or can you eyeball it? How do you use the terrain to help make them? And how do you build them to help them drain and minimize erosion? So I'm gonna get to all those questions. But first of all, okay, how do you decide, let's see here, how do you decide how high and steep to make them? That really depends on how fast of a landscape you're dealing with. So here it's pretty slow, and I really only made it just below knee high. It didn't have to be that high, and you can kind of compensate for that by making it steeper, because as long as a corner catches you really well, it doesn't have to be like overly tall or anything. And this is actually taller than it needs to be, even though it's quite a low corner. If you look, like majority of the tar marks are like right here, which isn't even like halfway up the turn. I mean, I'm exiting a little higher, but I don't need a very tall berm. So like if you don't have really fast landscape, don't worry about a really tall corner. Just make it nice and steep, because the idea around like a berm is you really want it to catch you, and then you want to be able to like generate speed out of it as you exit. So you need a nice strong catch and a nice smooth exit. And that's what I did here. I made it nice and steep in the first half, and then it mellows out and I have a nice downhill exit. In terms of radius, this is a really common question. I had a handful of you ask me on radius, so it's like one of the most like popular things people are wondering about, and it's such a hard one because I honestly eyeball it every time. And here's my tips for eyeballing what a corner's radius should be. You don't want to make it too like tight and short ever, because you're never going to have good flow out of that. And if you make it really long, it's going to be like just kind of lifeless. So you kind of have to find that nice balance, right? Too long of a corner will mean you're like just cruising through it, not getting a lot of speed. And too tight is going to be hard to like really rail it and make it nice. And what I do is I just like pick out points on the trail before I even like finish building it. Like I'll rough in a line, then I'll make it a flat turn, so I won't even like worry about the berm yet. I'll just like like if I was standing here, it was brand new, what I would be doing is cutting out all the salah bushes here, like all this greenery, and I would just like be making a defined line of where I want the trail to be. And I already knew where these rollers are sitting, that's the direction that I want to go, because that's where the landscape is heading, where I want the flow to happen. And I'd marked out like an exit, an entrance, and then I just tried to like kind of like take my shovel and draw the smoothest line possible from one point to the other. And then you take a look at it, you step back, you take a look, and you're like, okay, that looks pretty good. And with this, it worked out really well. And what I wish this berm had was a steeper run-in, because it is so dialed that you can really generate a lot of speed out of it. But if I had like a fast run-in into it, it would be so quick. And that's the big thing about like radius, is just really like trying to define what your exit is going to be, what your entrance should be, and then looking for the smoothest kind of curve in between. And yeah, there's really no recommended measurements or anything. It's not as like black and white as building like a dirt jump wooden ramp where you have like, for example, a 15-foot radius on an 8-foot takeoff. It's not a simple formula like that, because each landscape is unique and different. If you look at like where I'm standing right now, this is a pretty deep, tight corner. And because it's so deep and tight, I didn't want to make the turn too sharp. So you're mostly dipping down to get catched versus corner to get catched. So I don't know if I would consider this a berm or not. It's definitely like a bermed out jump thingy. But yeah, just like thinking about what you're riding, what you're actually doing in your head, and trying to like work that and imagine that flow in your mind, and that's gonna really help you shape things up. Okay, drainage is another huge issue. A ton of you have been asking me about how to build proper drainage for a corner, and I wanted to show you some different scenarios. So let's go take a look at that further down the trail here. This corner sitting right behind me here is the perfect candidate of a corner that is bound to be flooded all the time if you don't know what you're doing. And a lot of trail builders struggle with drainage and things pooling up in corners, and here's why. They don't think of the overall picture. So take this landscape around me, for example. I have a big long hill into a flat section where I know is the perfect spot for a corner. That's why I built one there. But I have to like change things around me. I can't just like build a berm there and leave this hill. I kind of want to like think of the overall picture. What I mean by that is grade every single thing around you. So I dug down in the ground here to build this long landing, and then you can see how deep in the ground I am. I'm like almost waist high deep here. Like the forest floor got way cut down, and then I used that to get nice dirt for the berm, but at the same time it allowed me to continue the grade so I could go downhill, and I could turn this completely flat section of forest. Like if you look at what the forest looks like right here, how it's like so level right there, this actually looked like that through here. Like you can see how the line was here, it just continued flat like that. And what I did is I cut it down into the ground, I graded it downhill all the way, and you can see where I stopped grading it downhill because that's where it's pooling right here. And I made sure to grade it even lower on the inside edge than the riding line right here, because I want the riding line to always be dry. Look at this corner right here. It was raining really hard this week. Every single thing is dry here. It is draining perfectly well. And then at the inside of the corner, right at the end, before it transitions into a jump, you can see there is like dried up, well, it's pretty mucky there still, but you'll never be riding here because the ride line's above it. So grading things downhill, making sure water is always draining away from where you ride. Just think of that in the back of your mind and think of the overall picture, not just the single feature. You want the whole trail to like flow together and be really nice, and then you want the water to always flow away from it. One other trick I did here, I mean, it was really easy in this case because I built a jump at the end of the corner. So it went down and then up, and then the low spot was where I was draining. But if you don't have the luxury of building like a jump out of it, or if you just don't want to build a jump out of it, if you want to like go downhill into another corner, what you can do to like stop everything from pooling is making sure you have a sideline for stuff to drain off to, like I did with this dirt pit right here. And you can also see, one thing I've done as a trick is I've slightly elevated the trail from the ground. So I graded the forest floor, dug it way down, and then you can see where I'm pointing here is like a few inches above this really mucky stuff down here. And that allows the ride line to always be above the wet spots. So that's the trick I use there. Let's go take a look at a few different examples. Okay, next question. Matthew Trivet asks, linking them, level ground or a transition to allow the bike to rise and fall into the corner. There's some really cool S-turns right back there, so let's go take a look at those and I'll answer that question for you. These S-turns right behind me here are probably my favorite corners in the entire network, and I can't even take credit for them because they were here when I started riding here. The guys killed it. So when you're looking at like the transitioning between turns, one thing you have to think about is aim and lineup. That is honestly more important than rise and fall, because whether or not you're working a flat ground like this, if you look, it's completely level in between, or there's like a bump in between or a dip in between, that doesn't really matter. You can kind of like work out the shapes just from riding it a few times and figuring out if it's a harsh transition or not. But what you really want to work on is lineup, because lineup is everything with the S-turns, and that's going to make the biggest difference on how they flow together. You kind of want to like enter high and exit low. That's always going to be the flowiest. And when you're building S-turns, always have that ride line in consideration. For example here, I enter high, I'm exiting low, and if I follow the inside line from the low exit of this corner, it should line me up, and it does, for the high side of the next corner. So whatever's the low side for the first turn should be the high side for the next turn. That's how you do it. That's how you line it up. It's always going to flow great that way. And that's what they did here. And that is why these corners are so sick. This berm right here is in some desperate need of help. It has received way more traffic than anticipated. And it has like a lot of fill in it, which generally kind of makes it wear down faster. In this case, they did a really awesome job because they used a giant log, lots of rock, but I mean, there obviously wasn't enough of a dirt layer on top of all of that. And some of the wood used to fill, like this piece here, was rotten. So today I'm gonna replace the rotten wood with just pure dirt. It's gonna be quite a bit of work, but totally worth it. And I'm gonna like thicken up everything, make a nice wide base. So like a foot like thick, if possible, base right along the top strip of this. Cover up that log completely so you can't see it anymore. And just like rake everything, get all the like loose rock out of here. It's a real struggle in this zone because it's so rocky. And I'm gonna take all those small rocks first. I'm gonna rake them all up into where I just took that rotten wood out. And we're gonna start like shaping things up in layers. Okay, so that's it. Let's kick off the build laps. Okay, I smashed that berm out in like an hour and a half. It's not the prettiest thing in the world to look at, but it works. It's looking really good. I mean, there's a nice fresh layer of dirt on top of it now, and the most important thing to consider when you're rebuilding an old beat up corner like this is really taking time to dial in the apex of the berm. So the point that you're really hitting and turning on the most at the top edge of the curve. In this case, that is right here. So I spent my time really thickening it out. I made it like nice and fat in here and strengthened that area of it. Covered up all those rocks that were there, and then down low I filled in the exposed log and the exposed rocks down there. It's got a nice fresh layer on it. I didn't spend a lot of time reshaping it. I just kind of scraped it and then raked it and then slap packed it, and now it's good to go. Looking pretty fun, so we should probably ride this now. Woo! That is way better. I need to try to like inside it nicer next time. Fresh turn! I'm taking the weirdest line through this. I wish I was like coming in lower. Still a bit of a wonky berm, but it's way better now. One good thing about doing trail work on weekends is random people ride by and they're so thankful and they bring you cookies. So that's a huge win. All right, I think that's everything I know about building berms. Let me know if you have any more questions. Just leave a note in the comments and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much, everyone. See you later.